For so many reasons, this is a wonderful Shabbat, and I'm extra enjoying myself. Zoe, what a wonderful job that you've been doing this morning and last night. There was so much happening at the shul, but I also have the added benefit of spending so much quality time with Iliana Brodsky, a new friend for me, but connected in so many ways because Iliana is a third-year rabbinical student at the Jewish Theological Seminary. I guess I would say my alma mater or whatever. It's where I grew up to be a rabbi also. That she is headed to Israel this upcoming spring semester. Possibly, we'll see, but peace is going to break out and allow you to go to Israel. That she has had numerous fellowships at JTS, the Milstein Fellowship for Interreligious Studies, the UJA Penn's Graduate Fellowship, and last year she held the position of rabbinic intern for the Synagogue Emmanuel in Charleston, where she enjoyed teaching Torah and working on community initiatives. At JTS, Iliana has taken a particular liking to Talmud and talking about the future of conservative Judaism. She's extremely driven by issues of access and equity in the Jewish world and is dedicated to creating more vibrant communities throughout her rabbinate. Ever enamored by her hometown of Brooklyn, New York. Anyone grew up in Brooklyn? See, that's an East Coast thing, right? But actually,
there are always a few in the crowd.
Absolutely. And after she's our darshanit now, and at 12:30 after services, that she'll be having a Q&A discussing about the conservative movement and things like that. So in the chapel at 12:30, we'll be able to spend some more time. So it is beautiful to share the pulpit, but also to spend Shabbat together. So welcome, Iliana.
Thank you, Rabbi Harris. Thank you, everybody, for such a warm welcome this morning. I'm just blown away and filled with nachas for a community that I've only been in for a short time. So I can only imagine how much joy and love you are all filled with being here today. It's also of note that there are visual accompaniments to my drash this morning here on either side. That's pretty lucky. I don't often get such a hand. The mystical and somewhat obscure vision that comes to our patriarch Jacob in this week's Parsha provides ample fodder for the project of rabbinic meaning-making. Jacob enters a dream state and sees the ladder pointed straight to the heavens. Right there. Upon this ladder, angels go up and angels come down. In my many years of shul going, I, and perhaps you, have heard all sorts of interpretations of what this dream could represent for Jacob, what it could be representing for us. The tradition doesn't only find esoteric meaning from the dream, though. It also sees it in the seemingly innocuous verse that precedes it. Chapter 28, verse 11 reads, Vayifga BaMakom vayelin sham kivo hashemesh. Vayikach mi avenei hamakom v'sei mera'ashotav v'yishkav b'makom hahu. And he encountered a certain place and stopped there, for the sun had set. And he took one of the stones of that place and placed it under his head, and he laid down in that very place. At face value, this verse is expository, just a setup for what comes next. It certainly lacks the supernatural luster of the dream sequence, and yet the rabbis find its meaning anything but plain. In fact, our commentators read many miracles into this very verse. Rabbi Yitzchak, a first-century Babylonian sage, seems particularly interested in these miraculous interpretations. In Tractate Hulin 91b, for those who are going to look it up after shul, he teaches that there are 3 different miracles which happen to Jacob in that certain place. The land contracts before Jacob, that's 1. The sun sets prematurely, that's 2. And the rocks under Jacob's head come to life, that's 3. Our rocks, as displayed right here. To understand the first miracle regarding the contraction of the land, the rabbis point us to a geographic inconsistency in the text. Rashi's first comment on the verse informs us that although general at face value, a certain place actually means Mount Moriah, the same mountain in Jerusalem where Abraham once brought up his son Isaac for sacrifice and where the temple will later be built. But there's a problem. The verses of our Parsha also tell us that Jacob renamed the place where he stopped and had his dream Beit El, or house of God, and that Beit El was formerly known as Luz. And how is it possible that Jacob was on Mount Moriah, which is in Jerusalem, but also in Luz, which lies significantly north of it? And if you're wondering, I had to look at quite a few maps to figure all this out. But trust me, I did the work. Rabbi Yitzchak explains that Jacob initially reaches his destination of Haran and completely passes by Mount Moriah without stopping. When he realizes his oversight, he feels bad about it and turns back towards Jerusalem. By the time he gets to Luz, God is so pleased with Jacob's determination to honor the holy site of his ancestors that God causes the land to contract before him. That is, the space between Luz and Moriah collapses in on itself, and Jacob's trek back from where he came is cut significantly. This, says Rashi, is the reason why the verse opens with the language Vayifga BaMakom. He encountered that place. The root of Vayifga has the connotation of a collision or a crash of sorts. The mountain in Jerusalem crashed with Jacob in Luz. And that's our first miracle. Rabbi Yitzchak derives the second miracle, the premature setting of the sun, from the unusual word order of the very next clause of this verse. Rashi identifies for us that in standard biblical Hebrew, the verse should have read, Vayivo Hashemesh Vayelen Sham. The sun set, so Jacob stopped there. But rather, we see, Vayelen Sham Kivo Hashemesh. He stopped there because the sun had set, as if it was a surprise to him. The disruption of the word order leads our sages to believe that there was also a disruption of the natural order. That Rabbi Yitzchak explains, after Jacob had finished his visit to Mount Moriah, God thought to God's self, this righteous man came all the way over to my house, he should stay for the night. And so God caused the sun to set prematurely, signaling to Jacob that he was meant to stay there overnight in that certain place. The third miracle has to do with the stones on which Jacob rested his head. Rabbi Yitzchak notices that here, where the verse describes Jacob making for himself a pillow, it says he takes from the stones of that place, stones being written explicitly in plural. But later, when he wakes up from his dream, the text indicates that he takes a stone, singular, and makes from it a monument. Rabbi Yitzchak teaches that Jacob, in fact, did gather many stones under his head before drifting to sleep. And when they touched his head, the stones animated. They began arguing with one another for a prime spot under Jacob's head, saying, let this righteous man place his head on me. No me, no me, no me. Hearing this, God unifies the stones into one large stone, allowing them all the honor of being Jacob's pillow. These three miracles that lie in Rabbi Yitzchak's reading of verse 11 are striking. From this description of Jacob stopping and lying down, we learn that actually the land collapsed in on itself and the sun set suddenly in the middle of the day, and that a bunch of stones got in an argument and became fused together as one. And if you don't buy that these things actually happened to Jacob, you're in pretty good company. It's worth noting that these miraculous interpretations are not universally accepted by the sages. Ibn Ezra, a highly regarded biblical commentator of the Middle Ages, mentions in his comment on verse 11 that There actually is no grammatical issue with Jacob taking from amongst the stones, meaning that he only took one. Ibn Ezra further advises that readers pay no mind to the mythological translations of this verse. There are other dissenters in the tradition who think these interpretations are far-fetched. I'm less concerned, however, with the accuracy or the legitimacy of a miraculous reading like Rabbi Yitzchak's than I am about the impulse which lies beneath them. So, why would Rabbi Yitzchak take such liberties with a simple narrative? Why extrapolate miracles from where there seemingly are not? There's a Hasidic principle called avodah begashmiut that offers an insight here. Avodah begashmiut literally translates to worship through the material realm, or as Rabbi Miriam Klotz describes, it's an awakening of a spiritual life through a somatic experience. She explains avodah traditionally referred to religious actions like prayer or performance of mitzvot, but the Hasidic masters expanded it to include actions such as eating, dancing, physical relations. Through prayerful dedication, the practice of avodah begashmiut can integrate the spiritual and the physical domains into one. Rabbi Yitzchak, in his interpretation, is demonstrating a clear commitment to such practice, a commitment to mining what is mundane for evidence of God's hand. Jewish tradition, especially as promoted by the sages of our Talmud, often pose the spiritual and the material in conflict with one another. Its instinct generally is to magnify the sanctity of that which is holy by separating it out from the mundane. We see this in every corner of our halachic lives, from our food traditions to how we organize our weeks. Separation is our mechanism for sanctification. Rabbi Yitzchak's reading of verse 11, though, teaches us that there are many ways to experience divine work in this world. And in fact, if we look closely enough into something that can feel mechanical or materially driven, we might be exposed to divine possibilities that we hadn't yet considered. There's something else at play for the commentators of this verse. To better understand how they're reading verse 11, we must look at the story which takes place right before it. In the immediately previous episode, Jacob had just tricked his brother Esau out of his birthright. His parents blessed Jacob and sent him far away from their home so that he might avoid Esau's violent retaliation. It's here, in his escape, that he's on his own for the very first time since inheriting Isaac's blessing. It's here that Jacob is not only acting as Jacob, son of Isaac, but also, for the first time, as Jacob, father of the nation Israel. Jacob's story from this point forward is not just his own, but also the story of the very beginnings of Am Yisrael. It's therefore, maybe not so surprising, that our sages wanted to read miracles into this origin story. That this origin story, the one of peoplehood, is deeply imbued with the divine hand. Rabbis Megdal and Harris asked me if I could share a little insight throughout my visit this weekend as to the state of the movement from my perspective as a seminary student. And I must say, it's a daunting task. Thinking about this week's Parsha, though, specifically about this treatment of verse 11, has helped me to find the words. This past year, and since October 7th, the Jewish world at large has been in a position as uncomfortable as laying one's head down on a pile of rocks, as terrifying as running away from home. My work, and I think the work for all of us now, is to find God's hand in this. Our pain is real, and it is warranted. And yet, if we want to come forth from this moment as an Am Yisrael, as a vibrant nation of Israel, renewed of strength and compassion, we must orient ourselves to the possibility that there are miracles happening for us as we speak. miracles that we can barely detect. The conservative movement represents unity amongst very disparate ideas. Our diversity of thought is a central factor in how we think about building, educating, and supporting our communities. We pride ourselves in pitching a wide tent. The seminary space is no exception. Every day, I pray and learn and work alongside people whose practices and convictions don't resemble my own. And yet, our ability to remain intact, to recognize our irrevocable bond as Jewish people, as lovers of Torah and peoplehood, and to continue to push and build one another has been a deep source of hope for me. It has made the seminary space often feel like divine refuge, like a miracle. My visit here this weekend is not meant to be unidirectional, and I'm happy to share more with you about my life as a seminary student, but I'm also excited to hear about and see more of your lives and how you've been finding comfort and solace and maybe even miracles of your own over the past year. May we continue to come together faithfully and peacefully, to let our differences be a source of strength in uncertain times, and may we attune ourselves to all the miracles of this world, however they present. Shabbat Shalom.